Good morning, ma'am. Good morning, classmates. Now we are going to discuss our assigned topic, which is all about philosophical perspective. So, before that, I'm Jerica Imata, the first reporter. Objectives. At the end of this topic or modules, you are expected to A. Articulate the various philosophical views about the self. B. Examine one's thoughts and experiences according to the philosophical views of the self. C. Propose an answer to the question, Who am I? Many philosophers grappled to understand the meaning of human life. They have attempted to answer the question, Who am I? And most of their views have influenced the way we look at our lives today. Dito muna tayo kay Socrates. Socrates, one of the famous Greek philosophers, he was a scholar, a teacher na nag-influence sa napakaraming thinkers all throughout the generation. He was also considered as the father of Western philosophy. Here Socrates insisted that the unexamined life is not worth living. This is perhaps the most satisfying philosophical assertion that Socrates claimed in order to protect human beings from the shallowness of living their lives. An examined life is a life that is duty-bound to develop self-knowledge and a self-dignified with values and integrity. Not only that, living a good life means having the wisdom to distinguish what is right from wrong. Socrates further argued that the unexamined life is no better off than animal life. Ibig sabihin, kung hindi alam ng isang tao kung ano nga bang purpose niya sa buhay, ay maaring hindi niya makuha ang magandang buhay. Ang tao na marunong tumingin sa tama at maling gawain ay puno ng dangal ang kanyang pagkatao. Ibig sabihin, hindi siya gagawa ng bagay na hindi magandang epekto sa kanya, pati na rin sa iba. Lagi niyang pinag-iisipan ang kanyang mga gagawin, kung ito ba ay maganda o hindi. Ang pamumuhay ng marangal ay simbolo ng karunungan ng isang tao. Hindi rin worth it ang iyong buhay kung ikaw ay nabubuhay lang. Hindi tayo hayop na matutulog lang, kakain lang, tapos manganganak lang, at pagkatapos wala nang iisipin. We are human na may paninindigan sa buhay. Para maging fully human, dapat gamitin natin ang ating kakayahan tungo sa kabutihan at alam natin ang tama sa mali. This is true because if we don't examine our life, mahihirapan tayo na i-live yung life natin. Mahihirapan tayo na ma-attain yung sinasabi ni Socrates na good life. For example, mahihirapan tayo na malaman yung course na gusto natin kasi di tayo nagbigay ng time and effort na kilalanin kung ano nga ba yung strength natin at kung ano nga ba yung skill natin at abilities. Kaya mas maganda na talagang kinikilala natin o ini-examine natin yung mga sarili natin. Kasi, if we know those things, madali na lang sa atin kung ano ang next steps na gagawin natin. Pero kung hindi natin ini-examine ang buhay natin, parang sasabihin natin sa sarili natin na kung ano na ba ang next na gagawin natin o kung saan na ba tayo patungo. Kaya nga ni-encourage tayo ni Socrates na i-examine natin yung buhay natin para it's worth living. Kasi kapag kilala natin ang ating sarili, we know what to do next. We know where are we going. Here in fact, Socrates wanted to tell the lawmakers, the community leaders, those who claim to be learned, especially his accusers, to recognize their ignorance. What hinders these experts in seeing reality is the belief that they already know everything. Such a belief will eliminate altogether the desire for self-moderation and ethical prudence. Then Socrates rightly pronounced that I know what I do not know. This perhaps is what makes Socrates the wisest among philosophers, for Socrates only in the recognition of one's ignorance that a person can thoroughly know oneself. Dito naman tayo kay Plato. Plato, also a Greek philosopher born in Athens during classical period in ancient Greece. For Plato, the psyche is composed of the three elements. These are the appetitive, spirited, and the mind. The appetitive element of the psyche include one's desires, pleasures, physical, comforts, etc. So, dito sa number 1, which is appetitive element, yan yung mga bagay na gusto nating gawin na alam nating magiging masaya tayo o magiging payapa tayo. Yung walang iniisip na problema, puro lamang kasiyahan. Number 2, the spirited element is part of the psyche that is excited when given challenges or fights back when agitated, or fights for justice when unjust practices are evident. In a way, this is the hot-blooded part of the psyche. Sa number 2 naman, which is itong spirited element, dito tayo nabibigyan ng challenges. For example, gusto kong gumala o kaya naman may nagaya sa kaibigan ko. Ngunit may kailangan akong gawin na schoolworks o kaya assignments na hindi lang siya madaling gawin. Dapat talaga bigyan ng efforts o focus. So dito ako nag-iisip o kaya itatanong sa sarili ko kung ano talaga ang aking gagawin. Sa number 3, the mind, however, is what Plato considers as the most superior of all the elements. He refers to this element as the nous, which means the conscious awareness of the self. The nous is the superpower that controls the affairs of the self. It decides, analyzes, thinks ahead, proposes what is the best, and rationally controls both appetitive and spirited elements of the psyche. So, sa number 3, which is yung mind natin, yun yung nagko-control sa both appetitive and spirited elements. So, dito tayo mapapaisip sa mga kabubuti para sa atin. Like, pipiliin ko yung paggawa ng schoolworks ko o assignments kaysa sa paggala. Kasi yung paggala pwede ipagpaliban, pero yung pag-aaral, once in a lifetime lang yan. So, you better choose the right decision. Another example. We take as an example, college to illustrate Plato's psyche. College students want to hang out with their friends, spend time on computer games, eat the favorite food, do thrilling activities that will excite the whole gang. This satisfies the appetitive element of the psyche. However, when professors throw challenging projects and assignments that would require tremendous time and effort, the spirited psyche kicks in to face challenges head-on. All these are going on the mind or nous a person has. In other words, in order to have a good life, one has to develop he knows and feel it with the understanding of the limits of the self and ethical standards. Kung mapapansin nyo sa picture, utter nonsense is yung mga bagay na hindi naman siya masyadong importante. Ngunit, yun yung nagpapasaya sa atin. Dito naman sa left side, yun yung mga responsibilities natin sa buhay na kailangan natin gawin. So, yung mind natin is nagko-control o nag-iisip kung ano ang ating dapat gawin. Kung baga, siya yung nagbibigay action tungo sa magandang desisyon. Next reporter.
Good morning, everyone. I am Kathy Danke. I will discuss about the two philosophers that assigned to me. Another concrete example of a highly self-controlled is the life of Saint Augustine. Saint Augustine was born on November 13, 354 BC in Tagaste, Africa. He succumbed to vices and pleasures of the world. Augustine was unsettled and restlessly searched for the meaning of his life until his conversion to Christianity. In his Confessions, he pronounced, "You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our heart is restless until it finds rest in you." What is Saint Augustine best known for? Saint Augustine was the bishop of Hippo from 396 to 430. A renowned theologian and prolific writer, he was also a skilled preacher and rhetorician. He is one of the Latin Fathers of the Church and in Roman Catholicism is formally recognized as a Doctor of the Church. Augustine returned to his homeland and embraced an ascetic life. He dedicated his Christian life to the pursuit of contemplative ideals. He practiced extreme self-denial and self-mortification. Later, he was elected as Bishop of Hippo. He fought bravely the errors of his time through his sermons and many writings. He died in 430 BC. and later was declared Doctor of the Church. The development of the self for St. Augustine is achieved through self-presentation and self-realization. He was not afraid to accept to himself and tell the people about his sinfulness. However, the realization of the wasted self is achieved through his conversion to the faith. Thus, his journey toward understanding of the self was centered on his religious convictions and beliefs. And also, here is the famous line of St. Augustine. Faith is to believe what you do not see. The reward of this faith is to see what you believe. Pray as true everything depended on God. Work as true everything depended on you. Another philosopher is René Descartes. Who was René Descartes? René Descartes was a French mathematician and philosopher during the 17th century. He is often considered a precursor to the rationalist school of thought, and his vast contribution to the fields of mathematics and philosophy. And also, René Descartes was born on March 31, 1596 in Le Hay, Turin, France. His parents, Joachim and Jane Descartes, but his mother died shortly after Descartes turned 1. He and his siblings were raised by their grandmother while his father was busy with work and as a council member in the provincial parliament. Descartes never married, but he fathered a child in 1635 with Helena Jans van der Stroom. The child named Francine, but died at age of 5 because of fever. René Descartes deviated from theocentric philosophies on the years before him. He was in fact able to redress the question concerning the self in a very different rational method. He started his case of discovering the self by his methodic tub. In his mediation on first philosophy, Descartes claimed that we cannot really own our senses because our perceptions can often deceive us. There are many times when we hear something when in fact there is nothing, and that we are deceived by our sense of hearing. Descartes states that to doubt whether the events he experiences at the moment are only products of his dreams and therefore illusions. He started to doubt about every realities that he had been accepting as true and only illusionary creations of an evil genius who designed all these false impressions in the world. Eventually, Descartes is left nothing but his doubt. How did René Descartes die? René Descartes died on February 11, 1650 in Stockholm, Sweden, succumbing to pneumonia at the age of 53. And they have the similarities and differences of Descartes and Augustine. The similarities are skepticism, meditation, self-knowledge, the divine light, and knowing God. And the differences of the two philosophers, Descartes understands that because he has the ability to think and doubt he exists. He has the ability to reason regardless of any physical influence, while Augustine has a similar understanding in relation to God, which result in his ultimate conversion and understanding of himself and God. That's all. Thank you. Next reporter.
Good morning, ma'am and classmate. I'm J.N. Candelario. Before we proceed our topic, who is John Locke? John Locke, FRS, was an English philosopher and physician, widely regarded as one of the most influential of Enlightenment thinkers and commonly known as the father of liberalism. Born in August 29, 1632, in Renton, United Kingdom. Died October 28 in Higher Level, United Kingdom. Locke opposed the idea that only reason is the source of knowledge of the self. His proposition is that the self is comparable to an empty space where everyday experiences contribute to the pile of knowledge that is put forth on that empty space experience. Therefore, is an important requirement in order to have sense data which, through the process of reflection and analysis, eventually become sense perception. For Locke, all knowledge senses exclusively through experience. Locke defines knowledge as the connections, an agreement or disagreement, and repugnancy of the ideas humans form. From this definition, it follows that our knowledge does not extend beyond the scope of human ideas. It has to be noted that the validity of sense perception is purely subjective. Perception is changing from one individual to another. For example, when one reads a text message, "Congratulations, you won 1 million pesos in an online lottery," from an unknown number, one text receiver may hastily reply in excitement and elation, while the other text receiver may just totally ignore it as a hoax or even treat it as a virus. Perception, therefore, is very subjective to Locke. This provides the most lenient leeway for every individual to be dependent in self-examination, self-management, and self-control. The individual person, for Locke, is not only capable of learning from experience, but also is skillful enough to process different perceptions from various experiences to form a more complex idea. These ideas then will become keys to understand complex realities about the self and the world. No man's knowledge here can go beyond it in his experience. So about that quote, once stated that for the human race to acquire knowledge, they must experience different things without doing, seeing, feeling, smelling, or hearing. Man cannot learn. Man's coming of age experience will push them to good or evil. For Hume. Who is David Hume? David Hume, born in May 7, April 26 in Old Style, 1711, Edinburgh, Scotland, died August 25, 1776, in Edinburgh. Scottish philosopher, historian, economist, and essayist, known especially for his philosophical empiricism and skepticism. Hume conceived of philosophy as the inductive experimental science of human nature. Hume claimed that there cannot be a persisting idea of the self, while Hume agreed that all ideas are derived from impressions. Problematically, it follows that the idea of the self is also derived from impressions. However, impressions are subjective, temporary, provisional, prejudicial, and even skewed, and therefore cannot be persisting. So, because the self must be a constant, persisting, stable thing, and yet all knowledge is derived from impressions, which are transient, non-persisting, variable things, it follows that we do not really have knowledge of a self, and therefore there is no self, or at least we should be agnostic on the issue. Inasmuch as we wanted to be persistent, constant, and stable with our knowledge about ourselves, Hume asserted that this is just impossible as long as we derive our knowledge from impressions. There will never be the self. This means that for Hume, all we know about ourselves are just bundles of temporary impressions. Perhaps this supports the difficulty of answering the questions, who am I? Because what we can readily answer are impressions such as name, height, color of hair, affiliations, skills, achievements, and the like. All these are temporary and non-persisting. In fact, Hume harshly claimed that there is no self. Hume thinks that each of our ideas is either copied from a simple impressions or is built up entirely from himself ideas that are so copied. If our minds could not reproduce our simple impressions by forming simple ideas copied from then we could not from any ideas at all. And now we proceed our the next reporter, Mark Anthony Montaño.
Hello everyone, my name is Mark Anthony L. Montaño. Immanuel Kant. Immanuel Kant was a German philosopher and one of the central Enlightenment thinkers born in Königsberg. Kant, comprehensive and systematic works in epistemology, metaphysics, ethics, and aesthetics have made him an influential figure in modern Western philosophy. Immanuel Kant, born April 22, 1724 in Königsberg, died February 12, 1804 in Königsberg. His parents, Regina Dorothea Rother, and his father, Johann Georg Kant, and sibling, Johann Heinrich Kant. Kant further argues that even we element everything, or in the case of discretes, doubt everything, there will still be space and time that will remain as. There are categories that cannot be outside of the selves, and they help provide of the self. Perception here does not belong to the word, it belongs to the self through temporal faculty. Rightly, Kant is able to claim that all the things of the selves are part that belongs to the self. This is possible because the mind possesses the order and the unity of a law, all raw sensations. In other words, the thing itself cannot be provide the idea, but it's only the spatial temporally faculty of the selves that makes the idea sensible. In short, Kant is only saying that our rationally unifies that makes sense perceptions we have, our experience that makes sensible ideas about ourselves and the world. These endogenous syntheses, save empirical theories of the science and the rational justification, innate ideas can also solve the problem of the ability of the selves perceives the world. Sigmund Freud was an Austrian neurologist and the founder of psychoanalysis, a clinical method for evaluating and treating pathologies, and the psyche of true dialogue between a patient and psychoanalyst. Freud was born to Galician Jewish parents in a Moravian town of the Freiburg in Austrian Empire. Sigmund Freud, born May 6, 1856 in Freiburg, Czechia, died September 23, 1934, Hampstead, London, United Kingdom. He has sibling Esther Adolphine, Anna, Lysander Gotthold, and he has also have a children, Anna Freud, Ernest, Sophia Freud, Martin Freud, Oliver, Mathilde Freud, and his parents, Amalia Freud and Jacob Freud. Sigmund Freud eliminated the victory and insisted on the complexity of the self. Freud refused to take self or subject as technical terms, regarded the selves as the I and ordinary constitute both the mental physical actions. So we can say I run, I ate, I decide, I feel clinging sensation, or I refuse to cheat because it's wrong. Admittedly, the question, who am I will not provide victorious unified answer, but a complicated diverse features of moral judgment. Any sensations, bodily movements, the perceptions. The I will never be the same. It will continue to change over time. In other words, Freud says I as a product of multiple interacting process system and seems to demonstrate this. Freud proposed two models of topographical and sexual model, Watson 2014. Topographical model, according to Freud, concept of hysteria, the individual person may both know and do not know certain things at the same time. We may say, for example, that we know a disadvantage and perils of missing classes without any reason, but we are not really sure why we still do it away. We are certain about the minute wrongs that we wrote about premarital sex. Pregnancy, sexually transmitted infections, ruin relationships and depressions. But we never understand why there is something somewhere inside us that makes us many of us do what we know is wrong. A structural model. Similar to the disintegrations of the selves in the empirical model, Freud's structural model will also represent self in three different agencies. 1. The ID is known as the primitive or instinctive component. 2. Ego is described by Freud as the part of the ID which has been modified by direct influence of the external world. 3. The super-ego synthesis the moral values and systems in society in order to function as the controlled outpost of the instinctive desires of the ID. MacLeod 2007. That's all.
Hi, I'm Nino Dominic Pialaman, and here is my topic. Ryle said that thinking I will never be found because it is just a ghost in the machine. It means he finds the philosophy of Descartes totally absurd. The mind is never separate from the body. He proposed that physical actions or behaviors are dispositions of the self. These dispositions are derived from our inner private experiences. In other words, we will only be able to understand the self based from the external manifestation, behaviors, expressions, language, desire, and the like. The mind, therefore, is nothing but a disposition of the self. Gilbert Ryle was a British philosopher, principally known for his critique of Cartesian dualism, for which he coined the phrase "ghost in the machine." He was a representative of the generation of British ordinary language philosophers who shared Ludwig Wittgenstein's approach to philosophical problems. So, Ryle asserted that the thinking I will never be discovered because it is impossible to find. He is just a ghost in the machine, which means he discovers the philosophy. Descartes is completely absurd. The mind is never separate from the body. He suggested that physical actions or behaviors are inclinations of the self. These attitudes are derived from our inner private encounters. To put it another way, we will only be able to comprehend the self through external manifestations such as behaviors, expressions, language, desire, and so on and so on. As a result, is nothing more than a disposition of the self. For Churchland, these philosophical and psychological directions will eventually be abandoned only to be replaced by a more acceptable trend in a neuroscience that provides explanation on how the brain works. Paul Montgomery Churchland was born on October 21, 1942. Is a Canadian philosopher known for his studies in neurophilosophy and the philosophy of mind. These philosophical and political issues are important to Churchland. Eventually, psychological directions will be established, abandoned only to be replaced by a more suitable candidate in neuroscience that is acceptable, gives an explanation of how the brain functions. The position is a direct attack against the folk psychology. Eliminative materialism sees that failure of folk psychology in explaining basic concepts such as sleep, learning, mental illness, and the like. Given the length of time that these sciences have investigated these concepts, and yet there is no definitive explanation offered to understand the mind that is tantamount to explanatory poverty. It is not remotely impossible that folk psychology will be replaced by neurobiology, as the Churchlands wanted to predict when people wanted to ask what is going on with themselves. They might as well go to MRI scan or CT scan to understand the present condition of the brain and how it currently works. This viewpoint is a direct challenge to popular psychology. Eliminative materialism sees folk psychology as failing to explain basic concepts. Sleep, learning, mental illness, and other similar concepts are discussed. Given the situation, the amount of time these sciences have spent researching these ideas. Despite this, no definitive explanation for the phenomenon has been offered. That is tantamount to explanatory poverty in my opinion. It's true. It's not impossible that folk psychology will be replaced by modern psychology. The Churchlands wanted to be able to predict when people would arrive. They might as well inquire as to what is going on with themselves if they wanted to. MRI or CT scans can be used to determine the current state of your body, the brain, and how it functions at the moment. Merleau-Ponty rejected classical empiricism because it eliminates the indeterminate complexities of experience that may have an effect on perception. In the same way, he also rejected the idealist intellectual position because it will only falsify perception based on one's biases and prejudices. What Merleau-Ponty proposes is treating perception as a causal process. It simply means that our perceptions are caused by the intricate experiences of the self, and processed intellectually while distinguishing truthful perception from illusory. Therefore, the self is taken as a phenomenon of the whole, a Gestalt understanding of perceptual analysis. Maurice Jean-Jacques Merleau-Ponty was French phenomenological philosopher, strongly influenced by Edmond Husserl and Martin Heidegger, born on March 14, 1908 in Rochefort. Merleau-Ponty scorned classical empiricism because it ignores the importance of experience, the ambiguous complexities of experience that may have an impact influence on perception in the same way. He turned down the offer because it will only distort perception. It is an idealist intellectual position based on one's prejudices and biases. What did Merleau-Ponty say? Proposes that perception be treated as a causal process. It's that simple. Means that our perceptions are influenced by the complexities of the world around us. Self-experiences that are intellectually processed while recognizing the difference between true and false perceptually consequently. The self is viewed as a gestalt phenomenon arising from the whole. Perceptual analysis is a concept that needs to be grasped. And that's all. Thank you for listening.